a destination you can reach. Maybe it's a journey itself. So we're going to talk about it. But the way I'm going to present, this is the outline of the presentation. So we're going to start with some conceptual definition, basically try to define happiness and success. And it's basically, you'll see in my presentation, the concept of success in my research is mainly related to the search for happiness ultimately, because the ultimate success in this regard is defined, and whether you find out what the means that you use is helping you to accomplish the ultimate ends as it's described by Aristotle. So we'll try to, in this case, a kind of converge to this two concepts together. So we're going to talk about philosophical perspectives and scientific perspective and spiritual perspectives. And of course, each one of those is really broad enough, so you can spend a whole night on every one of those components. So given the time limitations, we'll try to kind of highlight main point for each section, and then, so have and listen your comments and questions. For the definition side, it's interesting, even though happiness is quite old topic, it's really, there is still even disagreement on the very definition of happiness. There are a lot of different definitions, really, how you define happiness, what is happiness. In one way, they define happiness as an experience of joy and pleasure. In another way, they define happiness as a kind of accounting of the balance sheet of pleasure and pain, to really look at the overall balance sheet, the plus and minus, and see if you are overall have more pluses than minus, then you're happier. So that's another perspective to look at, really, happiness. The other one is really looking at life overall as satisfaction when you look back and reflect on your life, on everything entirely. There are certain ways that we measure in studies that you ask certain question. And basically, the question they ask is how much you're satisfied with your life, how much you feel good about your life when you think about everything, together. That's another way. The other one is when you particularly read Aristotle, you'll see that happiness is defined basically based on excellence. It's really not just a matter of joy and pleasure that you experience. Aristotle's argued that you have a certain potential, and if you really find a way to disclose your potential, if you reach the excellence in your life in this regard, the perfection, that you really will accomplish happiness, which is, in Aristotle, understanding is really ultimate good itself. And then you have, from spiritual and particularly from Islamic perspective, then you have that happiness as defined not as a goal, as a destination, is defined as a byproduct. As byproduct of really is not is really something that you directly seek and try to maximize pleasure. It's a pleasure that you gain through the God's pleasure, through really pursuing the divine's pleasure. So that's another one. So, and there are some measure theories on happiness. Then I kind of put them in three categories. There are many, but those are the key ones. One is as a set point theory. It's basically the idea that really happiness is stable. It is encoded in your genes. It's really like a body temperature. So body temperature for human being is stable, very much. Sometimes it can go up and down, but on average, is really you have a certain body temperature. So the idea here is really somehow everyone is born with certain stable level of happiness. And whatever you do, no matter what you do, you can only have a temporary up and down, but you again come back to this set point. That's one argument. The other one says that comparison theories, what they say, that's really, they say you always have a certain ideal life in your mind, and you always compare your own experience in life with this ideal life. So in this case, it's basically happiness in this regard is the perception that you have between your experienced life and ideal life. The closer you feel you're there, you're near to the ideal life, the happier you are. That's another argument. The fact theories argue that basically happiness is nothing other than the affection, the emotion that you experience. So in this regard, really is a pain and pleasure. If you can measure that one, then we can calculate the level of the pleasure or of the happiness that you have. Now we're going to start with the philosophical perspective. With philosophical perspective, I want to, of course, employ here as kind of philosophical methods as well. What I call Socratic teaching is basically is not lecturing; it's really engaging in dialogue, engaging in discussion to really raise the question. So, and I want to really have a little bit brain exercise. So, so maybe you ate food, you might really need some exercise. But it's brain exercise, so, and I want to raise question and get some, answer, comments from you, and hope that will help you to really be more active, So that's first question is really when you look at happiness, the definition, you see is really happiness is perceived as something good. So, first of all, do we really think that happiness is good? Is it good? Good, right? So, now, I think then the question is really when we say happiness is good, when you really want to be happy, the question is what is good and what is bad? Is good and bad is something relative? Or is actually there is some objective a way to define good and bad? That's really, so here's one of the questions. That's questions for is this. Which is one of the following is actually is bad? Which one of the following is bad? That's first is wrong, of course. Flowers, bad or good? Fruits, diamonds, bad or good? Dirt, good or bad? And E is none. Which one is correct? E or D? Okay, D, raise your hand. Those who say D, raise your hand. Okay. Okay. E, raise your hand. E. So it seems like D and E is almost equal, right? The number of those who prefer D. And here is that. So is dirt really good? Bad? Is it bad or good? Huh? It's good for those kids, right? Bad for parents, right? They're parents perhaps, right? So now the question is really, it's really what is good, what is bad. Now, basically, I'll come back to that one. The reason I, raised this one, when I came with this advertisements used by this, company, is famous in Turkey, and what they uses this one. This is a good slogan for their advertisement. They says dirt is good. Now, when I first saw that one as an economist, I say it's really great, interesting. Now, is dirt really good? It's absolutely, for them is good. Why? Because is without good, they can make money. They make millions of dollars of money every year out of dirt. Now, in this case, really the question whether dirt is good or bad, it depends on how you use it. If in this case, if you find a way, and if you know how to really use this dirt to make money, and if you are a business person that your goal to make money as a capitalist, then it's really dirt is very good for you. So it can be good for you.
You said money and good as equal?
Oh, no, that's money is good for capitalists. Because if you're a capitalist, that's why the different perspective. Now we're going to talk about that. For capitalists, absolutely. Dirt is good if it can help you to make money. Because the ultimate measurement for goodness and badness is money, basically. If you go asking Milton Friedman, what is morality, what is good, is bad, it says for a business person, is really what can give you opportunity to make money is good, which does not give you opportunity to make money is bad. That's very simple. So that's from a capitalist, materialist perspective. Now, of course, we can look at it from different perspective, but even the point is that really, if you can, so in this case, if you can find a way to reframe and actually find a way to in this case, make goodness out of even dirt, then you can change everything. Now, this is when I read this from Montaigne, what he says that's really very, it's a kind of memorable a quote from Montaigne. He says that life in itself is neither good nor evil. Life is the place of good and evil, according to what you make it. Now, the reason I like this one, because, I was here for 12 years. I moved to Riyadh a year ago. Most of my friends was quite surprised I moved there. And the very first question I will hear from them is, how is life in Riyadh, Is it good or bad, Now, when I actually came across this quote from Montaigne, and I said, yeah, what it means is basically means that when someone asks you, how is your life? It basically means that, how are you making choice in your life? Because this basically means that if your choice is good, then your life is good. If your choice is bad, then your life is bad. So that's really, it's quite good enough. Okay. Now the machine is testing our perception of good and bad here. So it's okay. So in this regard, really, if you somehow have the understanding of good as some things as the choice that you make, rather than something that is given or imposed on you externally, then in this case, really, goodness and badness defined based on what you make it. So, in this regard, if you ask Aristotle, as I would say, Aristotle is perhaps, if you really want to define any philosopher as a philosopher of happiness, I would say Aristotle would be the first one that should be on your list if you really study them. And, of course, Aristotle is, his views is famous in many different areas, but particularly when you read Nicomachean Ethics, that I think what you see that's really the major question that he deals with is really is happiness. How can you be happy? What is the way for you to accomplish happiness? Now, it's really interesting the way that he presented and he make arguments. When I look at it, I think Aristotle is interesting for me in this regard. Socrates is interesting, not very much in his writing on happiness, but particularly on his life, that the way that he perceived and he tried to really pursue happiness. Plato is a little bit different, I think, in this regard. But for Aristotle, basically, whatever you do for goodness. You do for good. Now, but he says, do you do for good? But then there is two types of good. One is intermediate good, that you do, is good not because it's good by itself, but it's good because as a means it can help you to accomplish something else, which you think is good for you. Now let's say, is money good or bad? Now, you can say money is good because if I have money, then I can actually go and get food. Now, food is really important for me because then I can actually sustain my life. Now, my life is important for me because I have a certain goal in life to accomplish. Therefore, money as a means actually is good for me. You can make such argument. But, Aristotle argued that many things that we see as a good are not really good in itself. They are good as an intermediate, as a means. But then he tried to ask question really, what is the supreme good? What is the ultimate good? What is the highest good? Then his definition is that this should be something that should be good by itself. They shall not be means for anything else. It shall not be seek for any other goals as a means. It should be sought by itself alone. So what is this? For Aristotle, this is happiness. He argues that happiness is something that actually you pursue, you try to accomplish for itself. You don't really want to be happy for something else, so you want to be happy just because happiness is good itself. Now, the question is, once you really see that happiness is the highest good, is the final ends, for which that everything is a means, works as a means. Now the question that Aristotle raises, well, how can you really reach this happiness? How can you really be happy in life? It's very interesting, the argument that he makes. He basically argues that, he argues that, that you can pursue sensual pleasure, you can pursue egoistic pleasure, you can pursue intellectual pleasure. But he tried to really give the extreme for each one of those, and he argues that ultimately, that's really the extreme of all of this is not good. And he gave an example for all of those, like, what will happen if you really just indulge in sensual pleasure, try to pursue every kind of pleasure, every kind of fun. And his argument that really the best way to really accomplish happiness is to have moderation. So the moderation is one of the key concepts that he emphasized. Really, moderation is in his argument is the best way to really, in this case, to have a harmony in the pursuit of happiness. But when you really look at it, he argues that you can, in his views, the Socratic views, is very much similar in that one. He come up with the hierarchical views on the type of pleasure. And he argues that basically sensual pleasure is animal kind of pleasure. That's pleasure that animals pursue as well. And those pleasure, even though it's really is good that when you have it, you like it a lot. But he argues that really those are qualitatively not greater things, that not really highest type of pleasure. And he argues that the second type of pleasure is egoistic pleasure, that he argues those who pursue fame, like a politician particularly, they pursue egoistic pleasure, but he argues that this is greater than essential pleasure, but is really not the highest pleasure. His argument that's really intellectual pleasure is the highest pleasure. The mind is the highest means, and the satisfactions of the mind through pursuing, in this case, the knowledge, the reality, that's really the highest level of pleasure. And then he come up with, in this case, the concept of virtue is basically the concept of virtue is to really, to understand that's your nature, to understand the moderation as the way of life to really accomplish happiness, then in this case, that's really, he argues, this will bring you a true happiness, so he try to make a strong case for that one. Now, the other philosophers, and I think this one's just, when we talk about Aristotle, I just want to briefly mention Socrates as well. It's really, when you look at Socrates in his life, the way that he pursued the pleasures and happiness is quite interesting. He was, in some books, defined as the poorest guy in Athens. The reason is that he didn't see any value in pursuing or making money, and therefore he was not really interested in making money, even though, that he could easily open, in this case, an academy and actually, teach and make money out of that one. He wasn't interested in that one. The reason that he was not interested in this one, because he argues that what will happen if you make money? So money will give you opportunity to really have more sensual pleasure. You can buy something and have more sensual pleasure. But he said this is really a lowest type of pleasure that animal experience. So that's really not as greatest, highest type of pleasure. Therefore, it's not worth to really even waste your time to pursue and to gain the means to accomplish that. So he was he pursued that intellectual pleasure being the highest pleasure, and he of course perceived the philosophers are the ones to be involved in intellectual activity, and in this regard, he was just really involved in Socratic, what we call dialogue and discussion, raising the question, discussing, and in this case, according to the views of course, those rulers of that time, corrupting the mind of youths by making them to raise the question, by challenging their established truths. So, and that's really, he enjoyed to do so, and he thought that that's really what we are for as a human being, and because our highest ability and what differs us from animals is our intellectual ability, and we can actually work on our intellectual side, and that's the way to really disclose our intellectual potential and to gain the highest level of pleasure. The other really philosopher I think is worth to look at it is Immanuel Kant. Immanuel Kant is you know, he's known particularly based on his you know, moral theory mostly, but I think he's really, you know, in summer I spent quite time to really study Kantian anthropology and try to look at Kant and Aristotle and Ghazali and Nursi and comparatively. And what I find out in Kant is basically he came up with the concept of predisposition. And his argument is that in human being, in human nature, there are main, you can say, there are four main potential. You can say there are four seeds in human nature. That's, you know, in one way. He argues that basically the base one is animality, is animal disposition. In other words, really, so we have animal instinct, we have animal, in this case, pleasure, so we have this animal side. So, but then he said that the second one, we have technical predisposition, that we can actually, if we understand and disclose this technical predisposition, then we can actually make good tools, make great machines, and really works like a great robots, really, to produce very good products. So he argues this is technical skills embedded in human nature. And then the third one he argues is pragmatic predisposition. So, and he argues that basically this is, you know, through the use of mind that we kind of really look at what is good, what is bad, and try to really decide, you know, really what's good for us and act in a pragmatic way to really maximize our own pleasure, utility, whatever, or interest through that one. But he said that there is also within human nature a moral disposition. And he argues that really this is a part of human nature. And in this regard, he says that really the highest level, even though he argues that this is something that you can really accomplish that one, particularly when you are youth, because your emotion is very much, you know, in power when you are younger. He says that like this wisdom comes with the age, particularly his argument that you really gain wisdom after the age of 40. You can really, it's hard for you to really gain before that. I recently read one of interesting definition of wisdom. I think it's very much it's a good definition for Kantian understanding of wisdom as well. It's defined wisdom as really to be able to see within illusion. In other words, so you have an illusion, it's really deceiving your eyes, but if you still have ability to overcome this illusion and see the reality, then that's the finest kind of wisdom. And that's really what Kant is thinking as well. His argument is that really you have a lot of things, particularly is kind of, you know, at the early age of your life, it makes it difficult for you to really understand the reality. You're kind of really, you're in self-deception. So once you get older and you get wiser and have the self-review of your life and self-review of the meaning of life and reality, he says that you can actually see this part, and that's how the morality come into place as well. He talks about, you know, the means for them and how to accomplish them, and I'm not going to, you know, given the time limitation, not going to talk about those. That's, I think, so overall, when you look at the philosophical side, is really, you can say that the idea is that really, this is some things that you can, you know, particularly involved in happiness is something that once you really understand your intellectual side, particularly and involved in the intellectual discourse that you can accomplish it. That's defined as the highest level of pleasure. The scientific perspective is really happiness is interesting. In particular recent years, like I say, last 2 decades, has been the subjects of various fields. You know, before it was like in economics, you know, as an economist, I would say 20 years ago, if you really write or talk about happiness, even though there are a lot of concepts in economics, it's very much rooted in the concept of happiness, but happiness was considered to be, you know, subject irrelevant to economics, and therefore was not really a subject of discussion among economists. But in the last, you know, 2 decades, then we have now the field in economics called the economics of happiness, where another field, economics, called the Neuroeconomics, is really studying happiness as well. And again, we have an entire field in psychology dedicated to this area called positive psychology. We have in sociology, so we have really, you know, in this regards, particularly social psychology. That's the field under sociology, deals with that one as well. Particularly the studies using aspiration index is very much really dealing with this, the very same issue on materialism and in material indulgence and happiness. That's really a very interesting area as well. And also now there is a kind of interdisciplinary studies between psychology, neuroscience, economics. So you know, in recent years, I began to really involve in that one as well. I will try to briefly share what is going on in this area as well. But before that, again, that's another kind of brain exercise question. You know, just give you a short break. Imagine that in the future, scientists and engineers develop an experience machine which can actually help you to get whatever, to feel or to gain whatever experience that you want to have in your life. You want to, you know, let's say eat banana. No, don't need to go to the market and buy banana and eat, and you know, you can just get connected with this machine, and then the machine will help you to feel that as if you're eating banana, and help you to feel the pleasure of eating banana. Now, I assume that this experience machine actually is very advanced. It can help you to gain any kind of experience, including, let's say, I don't know, the experience of honor. You want to be the president of the United States and feel that you're president and feel what does it mean to be the president. You actually plug in the machine and you gain this pleasure. You want to go to vacation, you know, wherever you want to go and stay in a 5-star hotel and plan what you want to do. Now, you just enter into the, you know, the machine, and the machine will actually help you to experience exactly what you will experience if you have the real life experience. Now, the reason that I'm talking about this hypothetical, you know, question, that's really, there are a lot of discussion on that. I don't know if you read it, there are some books, you know, some, you know, individuals really trying to talk about that one and involving as part of a kind of science fiction. But it might not be science fiction, actually. It might be science reality in near future, even if it's not going to be 100% you know, true, because the studies now they do, particularly in neuroscience, is basically to study the brain and to find the chemical reaction, the chemical, in this case, interaction in your brain when you have certain experience. Because the whole idea, after all, really, what you call pleasure, when you eat banana, the taste of banana doesn't really come from banana. It's the taste that's really created in the chemical reaction in your brain. Because you don't really get anything from banana other than certain signal which activate this reaction in your brain. Now, this is a scientific fact. Now, the question is, in this case, if you find a way, really, if we can really help you to have such experience through such machine, now the question is, would you agree to be hooked up to such experience machine?
If I want the experience of knowing Arabic fluently, and I get hooked up to the machine, and then I get out of it, but I still don't know Arabic.
Oh, you can't follow the machine. I do the machine for Arabic.
No.
That's
Never
because the point is that will actually help you to get whatever you want in your life. Because you have a certain mind
lifetime. In your lifetime, you have certain things on your list to accomplish ultimately to have certain experience. Now the question in this case is, if you can ask the machine, and you ask your people, what happened to your man? Tell us now. Well, automatically things the machine, day by day, month by month, year by year, it will help you to experience exactly what you are planning to experience through working in life. Because ultimately you go work, take money, you go store buy something, why are you doing that? You're doing it because you want to have certain experience. I mean, this is the goal for you. Now you can have a short pathway for you to accomplish it. Question is, would you agree to give up to solution? Yes or no is not just sufficient. You need to say why. Why yes, why not?
I think because I think the happiness comes with the victory of overcoming the challenges.
Don't worry about it. We will program this as well in the machine. So when we can program the way actually, make you to feel as if you had a challenge and overcome the challenge. It's not easy. It's not that big deal. I can do it. If this is some kind of reaction in your brain, you find out this key, we can unlock this one, and we will have this experience as well. Because that's what experience, so we will have to figure out this as well. So,
I think I might as well be dead then. I think someone giving me experiences is not like my going out to get them. It is a real difference. I would never want to be inside that place.
why?
Because I don't be living anymore.
I'm always busy. I'm always busy. If you need to have experience, you all experience, why don't you
I don't want all the experience. I want to do it myself. I work on the machine for the money.
Okay, you want the machines to give you the thing as if you do yourself.
Then I could as well, the machine uses the energy that I call a waste.
I mean, it means that the point factory is,
I don't really need anymore.
what does it mean? Who you are? What you want to mean? And the point is that, the question is not if you are purpose in mind to really, as a person, to have certain, have certain experience. Now you say, well,
It's pathetic.
okay, I'll do this. This.
I would use it not like permanently on myself, but selectively. I think for people who are limited due to medical reasons or accidents or whatever, they're not able to experience certain things like sitting on a roller coaster. So if we can open the machine and give them an experience of being on a roller coaster, then I think it's phenomenal.
Okay, so you do that if you are comfortable in the machine, you are disabled at the way you are.
Yes, I'm thinking this would be a great idea in instances where people, because of
Why is it not good for you? Why is it not good for you?
because it's something that I don't know how it's proven over time.
Oh, next one is actually prove to you that it's really is real, it's working. It has absolutely no difference between what you experience in reality and what you experience in the machine.
I think I'm willing to give it a try.
This,
I think because I think once you lose the whole sense of reality.
what's that?
Why is that? Because
No, what's the sense of reality? We'll help you to get the sense of reality through the machine as well.
that's the problem. So you
If reality is the sense, then we will help you to have the sense of
No, I
reality.
don't want the sense of reality. I want the experience reality itself.
Okay,
So once you're in the machine, then you
but remember we were
make your choice and you have
No,
no way to
one of the assumption you make, that is absolutely indistinguishable from reality. Experience in the machine is absolutely indistinguishable from reality. So, in this case, you will never ever feel the difference. So, what's the problem?
It's a trick question.
I guess my question would be, because I don't know what's the difference between you
Okay?
What's the difference between you and someone who's a drug dealer who offers the same thing as drugs?
Good point. Because the difference is that drug can only help you to have certain experience. This won't help you to have all kind of experience.
That's what the drug dealer says.
There are many people listening to that, by the way. It's not really, it's not completely anti-promise, you see, you know. But the question is really whether they are making good or bad choice. That's not the question. But the point is that they think that if the purpose is to have a certain experience, now if the drug can give you a shortcut, right, why not using drug? Why not? And I think you have absolute difficulty to have a counter-argument against it as long as you think the purpose in life is to have a certain value. Why not? If you try to have a value, if those drugs can actually provide the same value in a value one, then shortcut way without really indulging in trouble, working hard, making a lot of money, why not? I mean, then, you know, that's a serious question.
It takes your own self, your will, your soul. Yes, I feel it takes me away.
So you can still know something missing.
It's not, I'm not after experience, but that's the byproduct.
Is this machine that?
Well, I have two thoughts. One is that your experiences can be limited to those that you can imagine. And in real life, things occur to you that you never even think were possible. That would be one issue. And the other is if you hook up to a machine and you're not actually interacting with other people, you can't be what's truly good in the world because you have no interplay with anyone. And just because you're imagining an experience, being like why would I imagine myself, being a crusader or being a champion for the causes? You're not actually affecting anyone.
So your problem is actually the machine might be good, but eventually it's not good because it can really expand, the border of experience that I might have it in the future. That's might be a good argument, but the problem with that was really imagine that the machine is not a product of your mind alone, and if you accept that the mind of many people is greater than your own mind in terms of what are really great or experience that you can experience, then you might say, what they actually program here is much better than what once in the mind can imagine. Therefore, I will trust the mind of thousands intelligent individuals who are behind this machine rather than my own mind. That might be the case. Well, okay. Yes.
I'm just wondering if you have all of your goals finished in inventory and what's left in mastery.
What is that? You just experience it.
You don't have all of them. Yeah, but at the same time, in life, you always have the bad things around you to make you relatively feel
You want to have some surprise in your life, right? Unexpected. You can program this as well, no problem. So you can bring some unexpected things. That might be so. Anyway, I think that's enough of that, Jordan. Now, Max, the reason that I put it here is basically is really, I would say, the scientific, particularly scientific and capitalist system is really nothing different than this experience machine. And if you already embrace those materialist, capitalist values, and actually it's very much, that's the problem. So the only difference is that they haven't invented such a machine yet. They're not telling you that you have to have this one through working hard, making more money to get the other means. They can actually ignite certain part of your brain to have certain kind of pleasure. This is really ultimately, when you look at it, you know, the ultimate truth is the purpose why people do what they do, including why they have education, is to really making money. Why are you trying to make money overall, I'm talking? It's mainly because money can help you to buy something. Why you buy something? Because it can help you to have certain experience. No, what you're trying to do is to really maximize your pleasure and money things to having such experience. Now that's in this case, that's the question that we try or is they actively asking a survey. It is the question is, would you imagine you have an option and you have a second, you come to the life after that, and it's a new beginning, and what you were asked, you were given two options. The first option says that you're going to be human being again, but you will have absolutely miserable life. All kind of difficulty, all kind of pain, all kind of challenges. But human. Second, you will actually be animal, very happy. Whatever animal you prefer to be, you like to be a bird, you like to be, whatever you want to be, you will be. But you'll be very happy. Now, which one would you prefer to be? But unhappy, or animal, or very happy.
Who's making you make that choice?
No, I mean, you're the answer choice. This is a survey question. They asked actually, in the first time they did it on Harvard graduate students, they asked them to this question, so what do they want to be? And if they have such option. It's very, when you really turns out, he raised this one, it's a very similar question in a different way. So this is a very, interesting philosophical question. It's discussable. If there's such an option, what would you like to be? Human, unhappy, or animal happy? Okay, let's do the survey. Human, but unhappy. No third option, A or B, okay? No in between, half human, half animal doesn't work. Okay, human, but unhappy. 3, 4, 5, 7, 8. So you're willing to go through all kind of torture, be in prison, and be sick, every kind of difficulty. Well, you're fine, right with that. You know what you're choosing, right? Okay. Second, animal, but very happy. And but very happy. So where's the rest? They're not undecided. That's what we're seeing. So basically, that's the second question I raised on last one is really have this option. Happy human or happy angel? Which one now? Happy human? Happy angel? And angels are good creatures, right? I don't know. In Islam, this is just quite good. Christian research as well. I think it's defined as quite good. But imagine there are options that should be angel and human. Now, the reason that I asked that was basically this question is very much relevant to the understanding of your understanding of life, your understanding of illumination, your understanding of purpose in your life. So I will try to mention that the history and suicide and that was supposed to be in scientific part. So basically, in scientific parts, there has been a lot of studies and study they look at the connection between the increasing material well-being and subjective well-being. Bottom line is that's interesting. They find out that despite the enormous progress in material well-being that we have actually not experienced quite very good progress in subjective well-being. And they call this one, there's also that called a paradox. A paradox in the sense that the idea was that when you have happy you will be, but in reality turn out to be when you look at the data, it's indicated that's really not the case. Normally does not necessarily mean that the greater pleasure or greater subjective well-being that you experience. And I call this one, I say it's kind of this capitalist paradox versus capitalist paradox. So the idea, what I said is basically, scenes and light instruments, particularly in the West, with, after the Industrial Revolution, we have produced and consumed more, but when you look at the data, we enjoy less. It's not really subjective looking, it's not great. So we have multiplied our material possession, but also spiritual dimension. We have learned how to make a great deal, we forget how to live a great life. So it's this kind of really, when you look at it, there's a lot of things that you can find in a paradoxical way. It's therefore, it's really this one way you see it's very positive, it's really great. Another way you really look at it, the outcome is not quite right. So therefore, there are a lot of now studies trying to really just find what is the mistake that we make and how we can really solve this problem. As I mentioned, to you guys really thousands of books since 2008. Look at that, so over 5,000 books in 1 year alone came on happiness. And now there is a discussion to really, instead of GDP, to have gross happiness index, and to mention it well, we need to gross happiness index as well. So there's been this really big, as the Neuroeconomics mentioned to you before, this really area that's now kind of between neuroscience and economics. And we do this one as well using fMRI. And now actually we have two main projects that we're working on. So basically fMRI allows to put people in the machine, and then we experiment certain things on them. And when we do experiments, so as you can see here, like let's say you show them a happy picture and sad picture, and you can actually see certain part of brain, let's say in this case on the left side of brain, when you actually see the happy picture, the left side of brain will light up. When you see the sad picture, the right side of brain, a certain part of it will light up. The idea is that MRI is based off magnetic, magnets, use of magnets, because the idea is that is in the blood there is iron. So, and in this case, you can, through this high magnetic field, you can trace the flow of blood in the brain. Now, there are a lot of studies in neuroscience showing which part of the connection between the activation of certain part of brain and the certain experience that you have in life. So, in this regard, let's say, when you do any activity, the very first thing we do on the subjects, when you put them in a machine and see whether it works right or doesn't work well. So we ask them to just move their right hand, let's say. When they move their right hand, when we look at their brain, their left side of brain will actually light up. So that's really indicates that the left side of brain is activated now. Is actually there is a lot of diffusion of blood to that part. Now we try to, in this case, measure the activation of a certain part of brain and a certain experience that individual have, and try to see this connection between them. And then we now do some things on spiritual experience as well through using fMRI. That is the spiritual perspectives. Now, this one, how many? Are we run out of the time? Minus 25 minutes. See, that was just the beginning. Okay, we can perhaps do it just in 5-10 minutes to that one and finish it, hopefully. So, the spiritual perspectives, basically, and I think the key question I ask it is like, I say, imagine that alien visitors, there's here is particularly in one key difference is in the East and Western culture. In the Western culture and in Hollywood culture particularly, there's a lot of emphasis on alien. And so people are very much, involved in such imagination. But imagine that those aliens visit us, and they know everything and know every creature. They know animal, they know angel, they know evils, whatever exists. But they just don't know anything about human being. And imagine that those aliens come across to you and see you first time ever as a human being, and ask you very, very simple question. Who are you? Now, how will you answer this question? I teach MBA classes, economics. I try to relate economics and human being and happiness as well. And actually, I was able ultimately to convince the administration to really offer the seminars on economics of happiness and success at the college level to all of College of Business students. There are few hundred students, and all of them are required to take them. So now we are in spring break, after the spring break, so we're going to begin this series of seminars to do with 3 seminars. Now, one of the very first things that I try to make connection between human beings and economics, because when people think about economics, they always think about money, but in my views, economics is more about human being than money. Now, I teach MBA level courses. One thing that I ask my students, even in exam, I say, if you do not know the answer to this question, or at least if you do not attempt to know the answer to this question, you cannot pass my class at all. It's absolute minimum requirements. Because if you don't know who you are, I don't care about what else you know. So, but I tell you, last year when I asked this question to master students, and those excellent MBA students at this college, it's like they have excellent English and excellent, like around 4.0 GPAs, they're very good students, very bright students. And I asked them 6 questions and made it optional for them. I said, you can skip one of them and answer 5 only. All except one was actually courageous enough to answer this question. The rest just scared even to answer this question. So now it's a simple question, but it's actually, if you really read, philosophical, discourse, you see that this has been a quite old question. It's quite a powerful question. Now, who are you? Now, again, we can have a long discussion. I was like, since given the limitation of time, so we're not going to have a discussion. The question is, are you animal or angel? The question is, are you mind or spirit? Are you evil or good? Are you human or machine? And what is the difference? How we can really know who you are? Now, that's really the question that's, asked and answered by philosophers and at the same time by, certain religious scholars. And this part, when I'm presenting, is basically the happiness from spiritual perspective is mainly from the writings of Ghazali, which he wrote entire books on the chemistry of happiness. It's very interesting. It's very, and it's, actually, the books was published in Turkish, of course, in Arabic first, and in Turkish. When I moved to U.S., I first came across this book and read it here. I discovered Ghazali here and his writing on happiness here. So the other one is Nursi. Nursi is interesting to me. It's interesting in a way that because he argues that his concept of happiness is that this is something that if you really gain it, you will be happy. His argument is that the real happiness is that when you reach a level, being in palace and being in prison will make absolutely no difference for you, then you are really, really happy. Or you really know how to be happy. And he didn't say this one just as a word. He was actually in exile and in a prison for absolutely no justifiable reason for 28 years. But it's interesting, when he was in prison and he wrote letters to his, disciples, he used the concept, he says, he will sign the letter and he says, your perfectly happy brother, Said Nursi. Now, of course, it's really attract my attention. And I studied Nursi, I said, how come that you can be happy even if you are in prison, even if you are, in this case, experience and unfair treatments for no reason. So that's because really in Ghazali, and when I study Ghazali and Nursi together and find out that really they have very parallel views on this issue, and they have quite similar ideas. And basically, the main part is really is their understanding of human nature, who you are. So they when they ask this question, they say, no, actually, you are not what's your business. You are not what is, your name. You are what's the elements in your nature. So they come up with very strong, strong theory of human nature. And in their understanding is really, you are not one person. You have multiple selves within you. You are not one person. And you can really talk as I, is not the right pronoun, because when you say I, that I actually represent only one individual inside you. And they argue that really there are multiple individuals within you. There are multiple cells within you. So one is like I put it in the way that, and when I read it, I try to put in a metaphorical term, because Nursi used quite strong metaphors for that one. He used the metaphor of palace, and actually I used the metaphor of recreational vehicle, RV. Now, in this case, in what I define it, the views of Nursi and Ghazali, is your body is like an RV. And what makes you the elements within you are the residents of this RV, are the passenger in this RV. Now, who are in this RV? The driver is the free will. Second is the king, which is the spiritual heart, or qalb in their turn. And third is the conscious, is the judge within you. And the third one is the wazir, or you can say prime minister. It is the mind within you. And the fifth one is the animal soul, or the nafs, or the elephant within you. The sixth one is a self-centric ego, or ana, or is the showman, which really want to do show off and want to really hear the praise of other individual. So it's like the showman really want to seek this 15 minutes of the fame always inside you. And then they argue that there is an oppressive ego, which is the dog inside you, but it's not really dog that is the pet that you have a good view of it. It's really just a wild dog. If you don't really have good control of it, it can really harm the others. It can really destroy the others. It can hurt the others. That's kind of, in this case, the oppressive ego, or the feeling that calls you to oppress the other individual. Now, in this regard, really, what they define is that their definition is really that you, I kind of find it interesting, Buddha's definition of happiness was very good fit of the way that Ghazali and Nursi define definition. The Buddha says that there is no way to happiness, happiness is the way. Basically means that happiness is not destination, happiness is the journey in the way of life. Now, Nursi and Ghazali both argue that basically happiness is not destination. Happiness is that when you live your life, then in this vehicle, then to really have an harmony and to know that ultimately to serve not the interest of the animal soul or the elephant, or not the interest of the egoistic self or the showman, or not the interest of the dog, of the oppressive self, is to really, to first serve to the interest of the king, to follow your heart, which is the source of, they defined it, the love, the compassion, and to listen the mind, which is in this case is the reasoning mind, basically as the king, and the judge, which is the moral side, is basically doing the right things and doing the things that which really make you to feel good. Then I think that's they claim that the internal judge will make you that. Now, in their view, that really they define Islam in this regard as really as a religion which really provides you guidance to really have a happy life and to have happiness. That's really interesting when particularly look at the call for prayers that in Islam's 5 days call of prayer, there's one phrase in that hayal falah. Falah is defined as happiness and success as well. It's like come to the prayer and then come to the success and come to the happiness. So it's interesting, it's religion, but it's a religion that inviting people or inviting believers to really come to happiness and success every day 5 times. Now, in Nursi's and Ghazali's views, really, the whole idea is that you can be happy that if you, in this case, understand your weakness and actually use the guidance to control and control your weakness side, to control your animal desires, to control your selfish ego, to control your dog or the oppressive self. And then if you flourish your other strengths, which is you flourish your intellectual side, you flourish your spiritual side or your heart, and you flourish your conscious or wishdon. In their argument that if you, in this case, use the driver free will when you make a choice, and if you use this, in this case, free will, make a choice toward that one, then you can reach the Kamala, or what they define as the perfection, and intellectually, spiritually, and morally. And then you gain that's what God wants you to do, and you gain God's pleasure, God's become happy with your choice. Now, then they argue that's really your happiness is the byproduct of really pursuing, in this case, such pleasure, God's pleasure. Therefore, they think that's really, if you follow in that way, then you can control your weaknesses and flourish your strength and be happier. So then they provide on that one. I think we don't have that one. So when I put it really, I put those views, I put it the capitalist idea of happiness, I define it as a hedonic type of happiness. I put the suggestion, the way that the Socrates and Aristotle and Kant suggest to happiness, I call hedonic happiness, and hedonic is actually name in the literature, a lot of discussion on that one. But the third one is kind of my own making, come up with, I call it hedonic happiness, based on the ideas of really Nursi and Ghazali, is to really put God at the center of your happiness model, based on the God's understanding, the guidance to understand yourself, and with understanding who you are, and then living a life in a way that you can actually accomplish pleasure and happiness in this life and in hereafter. So that's the part I have against a lengthy discussion and paper on that one, comparing them. And I did study on that one. I think we don't have time on that one. It's interesting. We did an empirical study and qualitative study on the followers of Nursi, and try to really see how happier they are. It was really, it was interesting. That just lets me show you. We categorized them. We put them in 3 different categories: the beginner, intermediate, and advanced level of readers based on a certain criteria. And then we had the data looking the average subjective well-being of Turkish people, and then we look at the pleasure, subjective well-being of those individuals comparatively. And so it was interesting. We did this one with Aaron Manusov. He's now at Duke University. He was at FSU, and I was at FSU. We did together, and so we submit the paper is the top paper in the academic fields at the Journal of Happiness Studies, and inshallah is going to be published in that journal. But it's very lengthy, and it's very, it's a broad study. But just one slide showing you that what we find out really, those among the followers of readers of Nursi's writing. So we find out that even those at the beginner level, means that those who really haven't read his books and don't really are just are involved in certain activity in very part-time manner. We even find out them having greater satisfaction of life compared to the average satisfaction of life for adult people in Turkish. But then the interesting part, we find out that the more the people really follow this Nursi's idea of following the pleasure, spiritual pleasure, based spiritual centered type of pleasure, then the more they actually involve in that one, embrace such way of life, they find out that they, turn out to be, reporting greater subjective well-being as well. So, but that's again, we will ask many other questions in this regard, and that was just one slide I want to share with you. Thank you very much. Really,
any research needs to be in Google to find out who are the happiest nations. Also, right, most of them are very Scandinavia. Denmark is number one, Finland is number two, Sweden, Denmark, all very low. Also, right, because you don't have big deal of sunshine most of the year, very low winter. Our attackers are aware of these results and how we measure these studies, and are these results surprising for you?
I'm aware of that, of course, and I'm dealing with all of that one. And so, first of all, there are a lot of actually questions about those studies as whether you can do any trust questions, because whether those questions can comparatively give you something, and in this regards, I think that's really those questions to the survey sometimes very. You'll find out all the studies show differently, and still that's not quite established. It's very much disputable. And there are two things in the literature. One is really, we call this Islamic paradox. This economist that who in I think 1960 he came up with a study that he found out really when you look at the relationship between material well-being and subjective well-being, you find out that really over time that's the material well-being is really not the best indicator of your subjective well-being. That raises a lot of question of whether really material well-being has any impact on your subjective well-being. But I think the ultimate kind of conclusion that there got a lot of discussions that money matter to a certain level. Money can help you to gain pleasure if you are not able to really fulfill your basic needs. So in this regard, and when we gain money, it can really matter. But there are a lot of studies showing that up beyond a certain point, that's discussable, like some say 30,000, 20,000, so just be a discussion. What is this threshold? But it's a very well-established argument that beyond a certain threshold, money has virtually no impact on your subjective well-being. So that the question in this case, when we look at the country comparison as well, and whether really just material well-being or the difference in GDP is not only an indicator that showing that are happy or not, because those studies that you mentioned is very much parallel to the economic well-being. Okay, but that's really, and there are a lot of discussion on that one, and still it is not well established.
I noticed that most of the people in most Europe, they are not that much spiritual and very materialistic. Surprisingly, they don't have much spiritual guidance and too much of religious practice. And even so, it didn't matter spirituality, even so she became happy compared to other religious nations and other religious cultures.
That's why I understand that really when you look at this, those data, you need to look at very carefully, because what they're trying to do really, you need to make sure that when it's scientific study, you need to make sure that you're not really mixing an apple and orange and do comparison or control for certain things. And I think so many studies, when you look at it in that one, it's just really, without really look and asking certain questions to control for certain elements, if you just ask some general question, and which can be understood differently in different culture, that can really raise, you can get to different outcomes. Therefore, that's really, those studies are really, I'm much more, I value at this level, much more small level studies of the subjects, more kind of, in this case, rather than being mixed and not being able to distinguish that. So I think the other studies, as bad as Google, but there is, as I mentioned, trend now to try to see what we can come up with the overall index and measurements to really measure the overall subjective well-being on certain on a periodical level that we can really see as we go on the GDP, what is changing on that. What I see is not still,
I have a question about the actual two questions. You're talking about controlling some factors. In your analysis, it seems that Nursi readers are happier, and the more they read, the more they're happy. Do you think that this is related to reading Nursi, or is it about religiosity in general? For example, we have a comparison group that, for example, another group of people who are as much religious and they are as much happy or they are not happy. Any control issues. And the other issue, I think the side of Nursi focuses a lot on this issue of happiness, and he says that true believers are the true happy people. So if those people who are reading his writings over and over again, do you think that their responses would be biased? Because if they say, I'm reading Ghazali 7 times a week and I'm unhappy, do you think that those responses would not be biased? Are my questions clear?
Well, we can start with several things. First of all, just as a part of that, first of all, for those studies, it's really important that when you instead look at the comparable groups and try to see control for the differences and see what's really the main factors behind the differences. And so what we have to initially report that we said we can use the same type of question and ask the individual with different worldviews and see what theory is most best one, and then try to compare them. So that's what really give us, as we mentioned, the teaching that's studying in this group, it give us a good idea of this group, but we didn't really ask, we didn't measure this one directly. We're trying to show that we have in the literature trying to ask those questions in a direct way. And we try to measure that, so we have over 100 questions. And those questions, no, not that. So, and he's trying to indirectly measure that one, and then try to really, we ask them regularly in the intermediate classes as well. So we ask always this indirect question. We look at their aspiration part as well. What's in their worldviews in terms of material indulgence and how they are different as well. And you compare them with other studies in the literature. But the best in this case, the best way would be to do a similar study on the different religious groups and see whether it really is the same, whether this is some things that come from, in this case, certain religious experience or come from certain teaching in religious in this case, experience. So that's absolutely has to be done. So therefore, in general, as you can generalize and say, make a strong argument say that's what is general true for everyone. But you can say as a case study that for that particular group, that's they indicate that really Muslim because who have been involved and embraced those views and they life accordingly. They're all like they report to be to have a very good subjective being compared to other individuals, which we compare with just average British adults in this case.
You mentioned earlier GDP and things like that, which I think this gentleman, if I understood him correctly, mentioned Finland and Denmark and Sweden. I think those are countries in which people are not necessarily particularly rich, but in which wealth is much more evenly distributed. And wouldn't that also lead to less envy and greater contentment? I'm not saying happiness, I'm saying contentment, because there is a feeling that things are not totally unjust.
I think that's really one thing I say on this. I remember one of the conference that we had on happiness, one of the presenters to finances in the US to really just make more money, but they forget to really enjoy their time, because they really very much that those institutions are with it. This was in New York, vacation times. We're talking about in 6 weeks, 4 weeks is not enough vacation. We're talking about 6 weeks in the US, we have 2 weeks vacation. So things like the argument is that people here more spending more time walking, they are increasing the point because they have less time to really enjoy their life. Yes, in New York, so we have better welfare programs and relatively better distribution of income relatively. But that's not the indicator we can look at. I don't think that Europe is really free from most problem when you look at certain social psychological problems. An example is depression. An example is stress. An example is suicide. An example is crime. You need to look at those things because those things are very much close. They are very much related to the level of satisfaction in your life. If you are satisfied in your life, why should you commit suicide? If you are satisfied in your life, why should you actually be that much why should you be depressed? So the point is that if you have a high growing rate of depression, if you have a high growing rate of stress in society, if you have a high growing rate of certain other problems, then I think that you need to look at those things as well. And you need to look at it in the collective manner. Look at it in the countries. So therefore, I don't want you to just look at those general studies and based on the reporting of certain individual the way it answers some general questions. And I think it's better to look at some other indicators as well to see that to study them together. Therefore, I'm quite cautious when I look at those.
This will be the last question.
I know you mentioned economics, but if I were to write the best paragraph or the essay on economic practice, would you expect me to speak about the philosophical aspect, the capitalistic view, the spiritual view, or answer what is the economics of happiness?
In a very simple term, we recall that you use a calculator, you try to see what will really give you, applying the general Bentham is the guy that who really is well accepted to your life. So his argument is that your purpose as an individual is to pursue, to minimize your pain and maximize your pleasure. And Adam Smith is an author person, the father of economics. He argues that you realize self-interest, that you inherently pursue what is in best interest of you. So therefore, we will just let you to go and engage in the exchange in the free market. And what you will do, you will try to always put everything in terms of what is expected utility, meaning that what is expected net pain and pleasure of having certain things experienced. So when you as a rational person, you will try to gain what will give you maximum level of utility. We have a lot of analysis and everything just based on society is very well established. So ultimately, it's really nothing more than experience machining. It's ultimately just a great tool to help you how you can measure this experience and quantify it. That's what you do in the accounts. Okay? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. On behalf of Dr. Aydin, I would like to present a gift to you. For you. It's a British form of watermelon. It's really unique. Thank you very much. Just a few announcements. Next Wednesday we have Ms. Anya Cordell. She's going to give a lecture series here at 6 o'clock we have the dinner, 6:30 is the talk. She's a recipient of the Spritual and Brain Award. She will be speaking on Necati's journey, stating up to stereotyping, Islamophobia, xenophobia, and appearances. Then on March 30th, we have a concert at the Women's Parade. This is co-sponsored by the Foundation. Tickets are $10. If you want to find out more information, you can see any one of us. Thank you all very much. Have a good night.
Thank you.